Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my April reading wrap up. I know it's going up a little bit late. I was traveling during the time when I would normally film my wrap up and I'm just now getting a chance to sit down and film it, but I am so excited to talk about the books that I read last month with you guys. April actually wasn't the best reading month for me. In terms of quantity, I read 6 books, which is a little less than I normally would because I was in a reading slump for the majority of the month. Thankfully, I'm pretty much out of it now, but quality wise, I feel like my ratings were just kind of all across the board. We didn't have any 5 stars, but still a lot of books that I rated highly and would recommend to you guys. Also, every single book that I read in April, with the exception of 1, is either part of a reading vlog that's already up on my channel or will be up very soon. So as we go through the books, I'll let you know what books are in what video in case you want to know more in-depth thoughts as I was reading the books. With that, let's jump right into the wrap up. So I want to talk about the new releases that I read in April first because there were so many new books that came out that I was very highly anticipating. I ended up reading 2 new releases in April and they're going to be part of a reading vlog that will be up on my channel very soon. The first new release that I read is Wild Love by Elsie Silver. If you're unfamiliar, Elsie Silver wrote the Chestnut Spring series, which were super popular. I feel like everyone was talking about them last summer. They are cowboy romances and I was super hesitant to give them a try because that just did not sound like my thing at all, but ended up absolutely loving it, and now I'm very much in my country era thanks to those books. So when she announced she was writing a spin-off series to the Chestnut Spring series, I was so excited. Wild Love takes place in the same universe, so I wasn't sure if it was going to kind of have the same cowboy country vibes. It has similar vibes, but definitely not a cowboy romance. Wild Love follows Rosie and Ford, which another connection to the Chestnut Spring series is that Ford is Willa's brother. Ford works in the music industry. He's very successful. He is going back to this small town of Rose Hill to set up this recording studio, and then Rosie had an incident at her job in the big city where she lives, so she is moving back to Rose Hill to crash with her brother for a little bit. So there are quite a few tropes in this book. Ford being very successful in the music industry makes him a billionaire, so it's billionaire romance. Rosie's also the younger sister of Ford Grant's best friend, so is brother's best friend and then best friend's little sister. It also ends up being a single dad romance, which I'm not going to tell you how that trope comes about. And then it also kind of ends up being boss employee because Rosie ends up helping Ford out with his recording studio. I don't want to say I was disappointed by this one, but I do think I was just a little bit underwhelmed. I ended up rating this 3.75 stars. Like I mentioned, there were so many tropes in this book that I almost feel like the book kind of relied on the tropes to move everything along as opposed to having its own solid storyline. I think my biggest issue with the book though was that I just didn't really connect to the characters that much. I feel like neither of them had super distinctive characteristics aside from the fact that Ford worked in the music industry. They just didn't really have anything specifically about them that stood out to me. I also couldn't really wrap my head around what their dynamic was supposed to be. I feel like we would get these glimpses of them in the past and what they were like when they were growing up together in this small town, and they would claim that they hated each other and they picked on one another growing up, but then in the glimpses that we got, you can tell they didn't really hate each other, but I also never felt like they really liked each other that much. So I just couldn't understand what their dynamic was supposed to be. That being said though, I did still feel like there was a connection between them and there was chemistry. One of the spicy scenes in this book is gonna live in my head rent-free until the end of time. I thought it was so good. Elsie Silver's writing style just like works for me. I feel like she has all the elements that I look for in a romance, so I did overall enjoy it, but just not my favorite thing that she's written, mostly because of the characters and not being able to connect to them. I'm hoping that as the series progresses though, I will enjoy the other books a little bit more. The next new release that I read is Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. Sally Hepworth is one of my favorite authors. She writes thrillers, but I say thrillers lightly because I feel like it is more suspenseful literary fiction. So if you're not a big thriller person, because usually they're too like dark, I feel like Sally Hepworth's books would be good for you if you're wanting to try out something a little bit on the lighter side. Her books do deal with very like real life domestic type topics, but it's done in a way that I feel like isn't super heavy, and her books are just so enjoyable. I also highly recommend her books on audio. I've listened to all of them on audio because they're set in Australia, so they're narrated by an Australian narrator and it really immerses you in the story. My very favorite Sally book is The Good Sister, mostly because I loved the sister relationship in that book. So when I heard that Darling Girls was also going to be following sisters, I I was super excited. Darling Girls follows these 3 foster sisters, and we get past and present timelines. In the past, we're kind of seeing how they all ended up at this foster home together and what their lives were like growing up there. And then in the present, something happens that is drawing them back to the foster home, and a whole bunch of secrets start coming out about their time when they were there. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It wasn't my favorite Sally book ever, but not my least favorite either. I haven't rated any of her books below 3.5 stars. I think they're all great. I probably feel somewhere in the middle about this one in terms of like ranking it with her other books that I've read. I thought this book was so well paced. I was in it the whole time. I feel like she threw in these side characters and little details at the perfect moments to where it never felt like there was too much to keep track of, but you kind of forgot about it along the way, so that when it came up later, it just tied into all the twists so nicely. I gasped out loud several times. I was not expecting the reveals throughout. I was very invested in the characters the whole time, but I feel like it's not going to be a book that really sticks with me or I'm going to think about. It's definitely a book that I would recommend, and I really enjoyed it. I feel like I learned a lot about the foster care system too while reading this. So very enjoyable, very fast paced, very entertaining. I highly recommend it. I recommend all Sally's books. I feel like if you've never read from her before, this might be a good one to start with. The one book I read in April that is not part of a video is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. This one I wanted to read during the spring because the cover first off gives me very spring vibes, and just based on what I knew the book to be about, I felt like it would be great to read around the springtime, and I do think it is a really great spring and even summer read. I listened to this one on audio. I kept hearing the audiobook recommended because it is narrated by Meryl Streep, and she does a beautiful job narrating it. I highly recommend listening to this one on audio. This book also follows 3 sisters, and they are home for the summer in Michigan to work on their family's cherry farm, and their mother is recounting the story of her life growing up to them when she was an actress, and how she ended up dating this guy who was also an actor with her, who went on to be a very famous, well-known actor and celebrity. And I loved this book so much. I gave it 4.75 stars. I feel like when it first started out, I wasn't sure about it, but the more it went on, the more I got so invested, and I feel like it just got better and better the more I listened to it. Meryl Streep's narration definitely made it. Like, I don't know if I would have liked this one as much if I read it physically, but she just did a beautiful job telling this story. It truly felt like she was telling the story of her life when she was growing up as an actress, and I absolutely loved the sister relationships in this book and the family dynamics. I loved the setting so much of this cherry farm in Michigan. It literally made me want to go cherry picking. I've never been before, but I just loved the setting. I thought it was so descriptive and so picturesque. Something about it was just so comforting and cozy to listen to and so entertaining, but it also had some more hard-hitting topics, but it was done in a way that didn't feel super heavy to me. I teared up several times at this book. I laughed. It was just so sweet and endearing. It didn't quite give me the 5-star feeling. Like, I wasn't super invested. I don't think I'm gonna think about this one all the time, but I would highly recommend it. Okay, and then the last 3 books that I read in April were on my actual TBR that I set for the month, and they're part of a video where I had my cat help me decide what books on my TBR I should read. The first book I read for that video is Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Monigan. This one is following a screenwriter named Nora, and she traditionally writes these very like cupcake fluffy type romances for the equivalent of like the Hallmark Channel in this book. But in her personal life, her husband ends up leaving her and her family, so she ends up writing a screenplay based on that situation and what went down in her real life. But it ends up being very successful. It gets picked up and turned into this big Hollywood movie, and they actually are filming part of the movie in her backyard. After a few days, when they're getting ready to wrap up filming, the actor who plays her husband in the movie asks to like crash at Nora's place for a little bit, and then it follows their relationship from there. And I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. At first, I was kind of put off by it because the whole premise and the setup of the novel was kind of unbelievable to me. Like, I could not wrap my head around why this big Hollywood actor wanted to stay at this screenwriter's house. And then I also felt like more so, Nora was not acting very starstruck or fazed by him staying there. I feel like if it was me in this situation, I would be freaking out like, oh my god, this actor's at my house. But I feel like she wasn't at the level a normal person would be in this situation. So at first I was kind of put off by that and didn't feel super invested, but a situation ended up happening that I was not expecting that really hooked me into the story and added this whole layer of suspense. And after that moment, I was so in it. I was flipping the pages with so much anticipation. I had to know what was going to happen. And by the end, I was like, okay, I actually really want these characters to be together. I'm invested, I'm rooting for them, I'm rooting for their relationship, and I thought the ending was so well done. I love how everything wrapped up so nicely. It kind of reminded me at the beginning of Book Lovers, kind of how Book Lovers pokes fun at the whole traditional like Hallmark movie where you have someone in the city and someone in the country, and the city person leaves their whole life for this person that they fall in love with in the country, because those are the kind of movies that Nora traditionally writes. And then as the book evolved, it reminded me a lot of Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman, kind of mixed with like a little bit of a Beth O'Leary book. So if you like any of those things, I feel like you would like this one and I would recommend it. I definitely want to read more from this author. I know she has another summer romance that came out last year, and I think she has another one coming out this summer. So excited to check out more from her. The next book I read for that video is In the Weeds by B.K. Borison. This is the book that follows Love Light Farms. It's the second book in that series, and I love that this series is so seasonal reader coded. The first book, Love Light Farms, was the Christmas winter book, and this book took place in the spring, so I knew I wanted to read it during the springtime. I loved Love Light Farms so much, so I was really excited about this book. In this one, we're following two characters who we met in Love Light Farms. Our male main character is Beckett, who works on the Christmas tree farm, and then our female main character is Evie, who we also met in book one. She works in social media and she's feeling kind of burnt out of her job, and the only time she's ever really felt at peace lately was when she was visiting Love Light Farm. So she decides to go back, but it's kind of this whole awkward situation because she and Beckett had a one-night stand previously, and now it becomes this forced proximity situation when she goes back to the farm and sees him there again. And if you guys watched my previous wrap-ups, you might have heard me talk about how I was trying not to read any books that I rated below 3 stars this year. Unfortunately, this book broke that streak, which is so unexpected. I did not think I would rate this book any lower than 4 stars, maybe 3.5, but I ended up giving it 2 stars, unfortunately. I didn't actively dislike the book, but I was mostly just so bored by it. I feel like their dynamic really frustrated me because they had this one-night stand and now it's this forced proximity situation that they're in when they're together on the farm. So I thought there would be so much tension, but there really wasn't. I didn't feel like there was a strong pull between either of them. There was no mutual pining. I feel like they didn't really care one way or the other if they ended up together. More so on Evie's side. I feel like Evie wasn't super interested in Beckett. Beckett more so had feelings for Evie, but overall I just didn't feel like there was that much chemistry there, and I never really understood why they had this one-night stand and then didn't either leave it or move forward. I was just kind of confused by their dynamic, and I feel like the book dragged so much because it was so overly descriptive. There were so many details, and this book was like 100 pages too long for me. So overall, just wasn't an enjoyable time and didn't really feel the connection, so I wasn't super invested at all in this book or the relationship. Okay, and then finally I read Daisy Hates The Great Undoing by Jessa Hastings. This is book 4 in the Magnolia Park series, but it is the second book following Daisy Hates, her brother Julian, and her love interest Christian Hems. I absolutely love and adore this series so much. I was very highly anticipating this book in particular because I do feel like it's kind of the fan favorite of the series, and I realized from reading books 1 through 3 that I much preferred Daisy's character to Magnolia's, so I was just so excited to get another Daisy book. I was super impressed in Daisy's first book how it followed the same timeline of events as Magnolia's book, but it didn't feel repetitive at all. It felt like it was very much its own story, and the things that did kind of get rehashed you were interested to see from these other characters' perspectives. I thought this was going to be an easy 5 stars. I ended up giving it 4.75 stars, which I know it sounds so dramatic, but for a series where it feels like a 5-star series to me and some of my favorite books that I've read of the year, I was just expecting this to be another 6-star read, and it didn't quite hit the mark for me. I feel like this is probably my least favorite of the series too, which was just a little bit disappointing, but I mean, it was 4.75 stars, so it was still incredible. I just feel like it was super repetitive, and the stuff that we did get new perspectives on and new insight, I feel like it was kind of stuff that I could have inferred covered anyway, so it just didn't feel like we were getting that much new information out of this story. I also was kind of annoyed by the ending of this book because if you know how book 3 in this series ends, I was so anxious to see what was going on the other side of things in this book, and it kind of cuts off right before that part happens. So it left me hanging, it left me feeling disappointed. I still absolutely love and adore these characters, and I love Jess's writing. I get so swept up, and I do feel like these characters are real people, so I am super invested, and I loved it, but just a little bit disappointed in terms of how I felt about books 2 and 3 in this series, because those are like 6-star reads to me, especially Daisy's first book, book 2 in this series. So I just had really sky-high expectations that I don't think were quite met, but still such a great book and still adore the series. I'm nervous but excited to go into book 5. So those are the 6 books that I read in April. I feel like this wrap up was super short and sweet, but the month of May is already looking up. I'm out of my slump. I've already had a 5-star read this month, so be on the lookout for that reading vlog that I mentioned that is going to go up very, very soon, featuring 2 of the new releases that I read in April. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it, along with other future book videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys read in April, if you read any of the books that I read, what your thoughts are on them, all in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it, and I will see you guys very soon in the next one. Bye guys.